Just be happy with who you are. Just be happy with who you are. Just be happy with who you are.
All right, part 2, theoretical perspectives, and we're going to look at the psychodynamic perspective, learning perspective, cognitive behavioral perspective, and the biological and sociocultural perspectives. And we'll start with psychodynamic perspectives and how they view personality disorder. Now first, the psychodynamic perspective, where the traditional Freudian focus is on the unresolved Oedipal conflicts in explaining normal and abnormal personality development. But more recent psychodynamic theorists have focused on the pre-Oedipal period in explaining the development of such personality disorders as narcissistic and borderline personality. Hans Kohut, out of social self-psychology, most of his work was regarding narcissistic personality, saw that in early childhood, health narcissism, the world revolves them, is how that was coined in terms of health narcissism. That's the concept that the world revolves around that person with that predetermined disability, if you will. Parents reflect back to childhood nourishing support for self-esteem, the positive feedback that we would be giving, and what form and how frequently. Eventually, in later childhood, this childhood narcissism gives way to realistic appraisals of self and others. Now, children don't receive empathy and support from that don't receive empathy and support from the parents develop lower self-esteem. It leads to feeling of inadequacies. Pathological narcissism involves constructing a grandiose facade, if you will, a cloak of perfection, constantly working on it, risks of crumbling if they don't look after it and nurture this sort of belief system they start to create because it's important to them. Now, Otto Kernberg, he coined the term splitting. Most work was with borderline personality, a child's failure to synthesize the contradictory images of good and bad results in failure to develop a consistent self-image. Therefore, splitting, essentially moving back and forth between seeing yourself as all good or seeing yourself as all bad. Now, Margaret Mailer, she borrowed the biological term symbiotic, and she views the relationship between infant and mother as symbiotic, or an interdependency between, where the child identifies and is fused with the mother. They don't make that separation as most children do. So slowly children differentiate their own identity and self from their mothers, separation, individualization. But these kids they fail to do this, and they're viewed as underlying causes borderline of personality. Now, if we look at learning, the learning theorists view personality disorder in terms of maladaptive patterns of behavior rather than personality traits. Learning theorists seek to identify the early learning experiences and present reinforcers that may explain the development and maintenance of personality disorders. Now, within this sort of framework of psychodynamic, we can include family perspective. And family perspective has many theorists that argue that disturbed family relationships play roles in the development of many personality disorders. Antisocial personality disorder is connected with parental rejection and neglect, and parental modeling for antisocial behavior. Now remember, you might go, my parents didn't like me very well, but it's the body of it over the long haul. We may have had a lot more variability where we had more positive mixed in with some more negative, where some people, their experience is quite a bit different. Cognitive behavior perspective. Now this includes a name we've mentioned before, Albert Bandura, where he looked at social cognitive. He's a social cognitive theorist and has focused on the role of observational learning in aggressive behavior, which is one of the most common components of antisocial behavior, and that children acquire skills, including aggressive skills, by observing the behavior of others. Cognitive behavior-oriented psychologists have shown that the way in which people with personality disorder interpret their social experience influences their behavior. So our early learning about the world and how it treats us and how we are to treat the world is different for these children that grow up with these sorts of personality disorders. And from the learning and family perspective, it's learned through the interaction with our family. Got a hair going on here. Okay. Research on biological perspective has shown the familial links in various personality disorders that are consistent with but do not prove, and that's an important. Remember when we talked about experiments where there's no cause and effect with the correlation? Sometimes they're just correlational. They don't prove, but they show there's a relationship. We just don't know to what degree. And so they're consistent with but don't prove genetic means of transmission. Some research evidence shows that people with antisocial personalities not only lack emotional responsiveness to physically threatening stimuli, but they also have reduced levels of automatic reactivity. People with antisocial personality may also require higher levels of stimulation to maintain optimum levels of arousal. Now, Jeffrey Gray, he introduced reinforcement sensitivity theory, which focuses on three neuropsychological systems. There's a growing research from the molecular genetics and neuroimaging studies. So part of what they're learning is, one, a behavioral approach system, or a BAS, which is sensitive to and anticipates rewards. The flight, fright, freeze system, FFFS, a fear response to a punishing stimuli. And third, the behavioral inhibition system, the BIS, a sensitivity to the potential conflicts caused by expected rewards and punishments in a situation. And so there isn't yet a very clear perspective. And as you've mentioned before, it's like wearing sunglasses. So every one of these theories is got a view, an understanding of how they think within their theory these disorders emerge. But there isn't an absolute one way. The sociocultural view, sociocultural theorists focus on adverse social conditions that may contribute to the development of personality disorders, especially antisocial personality. The effects of poverty, urban blight, and drug abuse can lead to family disorganization and disintegration, making it less likely that children will receive the nurturance and the support to help them develop more socially adaptive behavior patterns. These stressors are associated with increased likelihood for child abuse and neglect, which can in turn contribute to lower self-esteem, anger, and resentment, a lack of empathy, and a callous disregard for the feelings of others. Antisocial personality. Now, as I just had finished saying, remember, there isn't an absolute right and wrong way to view the causes. These are theoretical perspectives. And we have already also explored and sort of touched on the likelihood that a better understanding of causes would come from a grouping or a collective of the theorists to sort of shine a light on that. So the next video that we'll do is going to be on treatment, so we'll see you then.